Carinthia is a small state in the Julian Alps, right on the southern border of Austria. Initially it was a duchy, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, meaning it took part in World War I, fighting the Italians, the Serbians and of course the Russians. But immediately after the war they'd be embroiled in their own conflict, a conflict this small state had to fight alone. So that's why today we're going to ask the question, the Carinthian plebiscite, what was it? In late 1918, the many ethnicities of the old Austrian Empire began to make their own national assemblies, one of which being the united South Slavic state, the state of Serb, Croats and Slovenes, more commonly known as Yugoslavia. Immediately after being founded in October of 1918, the Slovene state began to make moves on Carinthia to Anschluss the Slovene-speaking population. In the city of Marburg, now Maribor, they proclaimed themselves to be a part of the German Austrian state, which infuriated a lot of the Slavic-speaking areas around the town. So much so, Major Rudolf Meister, a man who grew up in a German-speaking Slovene town, originally disliking Slavs, turned to their cause and began gathering as many men as he could, totaling a number of around 4,000 men and 200 officers in the city. And then in 1918, the war had ended, along with four of the world's most influential empires: the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the German Empire, and of course the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Of course, by 1918, the empire had seen better days. One of its most influential leaders, Kaiser Franz Joseph, had died, leaving the young Karl unprepared and on the throne. With forces stuck up the Alps, it was not a very good time to be an Austrian. November 11th, 1918, and the armistice is signed. The Austrian Empire is no more, splitting off into different countries: Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, and of course Yugoslavia. All the different towns across the empire declare their allegiance to each individual state, and Carinthia chooses Austria. And of course the Yugoslav army comes to check that, along with Rudolf Meister. So imagine you head home to your hometown and you're ready to set your head down on your own bed, have a home-cooked meal for the first time in God knows how long. You're ready to live your life post-war. But of course this all gets interrupted straight away. The people you've fought alongside with for the past 4.5 years are now invading. The Slovene state kept rolling on, taking the towns of Maistal and Unterdrauberg all the way back in September of the same year, and they continue marching into Huantal, Bleiburg, capturing the former on November 23rd and the town of Griffin on December 2nd. The Styrians allowed the Yugoslav army to take Lower Styria, though the Carinthians did not roll over so easy. Dr. Arthur Leibniz on December 5th formed the Carinthians Volkswehr and Schutzwehr, led by Ludwig Hogarth. By December 5th, the Yugoslav forces have taken land all the way from Arnolstein, which is on the tri-point between Italy, Austria and Slovenia, all the way up to Püschritz on the Styrian border. This is what began the Kärnten Abwehrkampf, or the Carinthian civil defence. In January of 1919, in Maribor there would be what is known as the Marburg Bloody Sunday, where there was 30 casualties, 9 of which being deaths. This is when the Germans, upon waiting on Woodrow Wilson's delegation, were fired upon by Slovene troops under the command of Meister. Both sides have their own theories and reasons for this to happen. The Germans believe it was unprovoked and that Meister fired upon the crowds relentlessly, whereas the Slovenes say that it was the German crowd that was troublemaking. Some saying that soldiers fired above their heads and that one Ivan Smenkovic, a police inspector, was attacked by the crowd. Whatever happened, this led to the Slovene troops firing upon the civilian crowd. 4 months later, the Carinthian army managed to push the Slovenes back right back to the original imperial borders, though this only lasted a matter of weeks until May, when a Slovene counter-offensive then pushed the Carinthians back, undoing all their hard work, to the December borders. As this was happening, the Allies, who were formerly known as the Entente, started drafting up the idea of a plebiscite, or vote among the people. This was brought up by Lieutenant Colonel Sherman Miles, as the conflict had really caught the eye of these powers in January and February. And the situation was getting worse. On May 30th, the Carinthian provincial government had to move the capital from Klagenfurt, which was the largest city in the state, all the way up to Spittal and Oberland, as the Slovene forces continued to push further and further north. Klagenfurt would be occupied for 2 months. On the 2nd of June 1919, in Saint-Germain, just outside Paris, they had to sign a separate peace treaty outside of Versailles, which was finally signed in September 10th, where the Austrians had to give up small towns such as Maestag, Zeeland, and the area around Untertrauberg to Yugoslavia, as well as some minor territories to the Italians, which was promised to them as conditions for joining the Great War. Finally, the guns fall silent and there is peace, though Carinthia is still being occupied by the Yugoslav army. But the land is split into two zones. Zone A being 70% Slovene and Zone B being majority German. The refugees who have been displaced during the conflict were allowed to return and they were repatriated, and this brought some much needed morale to the region. So the Inter-Allied Commission would arrive on the 20th of June of that year, and they would monitor the situation. But as they were waiting for the vote, the amount of propaganda go through the roof. The German Carinthians would go more of the angle of, we don't want this, we just want to live, essentially. We just want peace and to, have some time off after 4.5 years of war, soon becoming 5. Whereas the Slovenes made a great error. They tried to push more of the angle of ethnic nationalism, the Slovenes slaying the Carinthian Lindworm, which is a mythical dragon which is very important to the region. Now, even though Slovenes living there may have been ethnically Slovene, they still identified with the culture of the region, and this would come back to bite the Yugoslav army later on. So it was going to be clear Zone B would want to remain a part of the Austrian State, as they were a majority German-speaking region. But Zone A, it was a bit more up in the air. So when it finally came around to the vote, it was 59% in favour of remaining a part of Austria. Out of 37,000 people who voted, 22,000 voted to remain as a part of Austria. The very next day, again, Rudolf Meister tried to invade with the Yugoslav army, though this time he was immediately pushed back, as on the 18th of November 1920, the Zone A was handed back to the Austrian government, and this time Carinthia no longer had to stand alone. In a time of heavy political instability all across Europe after the war, this was one of the most clear-cut and successful showcases of determination, self-determination, and being able to determine the future of your own nation. The borders would remain this way until the end of World War II, when Josip Tito would try the exact same thing, and he would fail for a second time. Finally, we'd like to give a huge thank you to the Bezirksheimatmuseum Völkermarkt for giving our writer and editor Josh all the information he needed while researching this topic. Massively helpful, and we couldn't have done it without them. And of course, thank you as well for watching this video. This is going to be the first in a hopefully long-running series on niche topics to do with World War I and the interwar period. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.